Okay, when I say Abraham Lincoln, what's the first thing that pops in your head? Probably a tall hat, a serious face, maybe the Gettysburg Address. But today, we're going to look at the 16th president in a way you've probably never imagined, a much more physical way.
So really, if you had to boil them down to just a few words, what would they be? Go on, take a sec. I bet some very specific, very famous titles are coming to mind, right?
And yeah, you'd be spot on. President. The great emancipator. A statesman who, let's be honest, guided the country through its absolute darkest hour. I mean, those are the titles that fill the history books, and for a very, very good reason. But that's not the whole story. Not by a long shot.
How about wrestling champion? Yep, you heard that right. Long before he was grappling with political rivals in Washington, D.C., Abraham Lincoln was literally throwing opponents to the mat. It's a side of Honest Abe that's, well, as surprising as it is awesome.
So the big question is, how on earth does a future president become a wrestling phenom? Well, to figure that out, we've got to go back. Way back to the rough and tumble world of the early 1800s, when a young Lincoln was just starting to make a name for himself.
First off, the guy was a giant for his time, 6'4". I mean, that alone would make him intimidating. But you combine that incredible height with the natural raw strength he got from years of tough farm labor, and you've basically got the perfect build for a wrestler.
And we're not talking about some tame, polite form of wrestling here. No. This was catch as catch can. It was a brutal, no-holds-barred style that was super popular back in the day. You can kind of think of it as a great-great-grandfather to modern freestyle wrestling and even MMA. This was not a game. It was a serious, gritty test of pure strength and skill.
And get this, he wasn't just good at it, he was a champion. By the time he was just 21 years old, long before politics was even on his radar, Abe Lincoln was already the county wrestling champion. This was way more than just a hobby for him. He was totally dominant.
You know, every great champion has that one legendary story, that defining moment that everyone talks about. For Lincoln, that moment went down in a small village in Illinois. It was a showdown that was going to turn him into a local hero and really start building the Lincoln legend.
So picture this. In one corner, you've got young Abe Lincoln, the tall, strong new guy in town, working at the local shop. And in the other corner, Jack Armstrong. He's the local champ, the leader of a tough gang of guys. Of course, Armstrong challenges Lincoln, and you better believe a huge crowd gathered to see what would happen.
Okay, so the match was super intense. Legend has it that Armstrong started fighting dirty, which, as you can imagine, really ticked Lincoln off. But Abe didn't back down. He held his ground. And eventually, Armstrong had no choice but to give up. He actually admitted that Lincoln was, and I quote, the best feller. So Lincoln didn't just win the fight, he won the guy's respect.
And that victory over Jack Armstrong, it was a huge deal. It was so much more than just a win. It totally shaped his reputation. He went from being the new guy in town to being a celebrated hometown hero. It showed everyone in the community that he wasn't just strong, he was fair and honorable too.
But here's the thing, that legendary match wasn't just a fluke. Not at all. It was just one highlight in a long, and I mean incredibly dominant, wrestling career that lasted for more than 10 years. And when you look at the numbers, well, they're just staggering.
So over about 12 years, Lincoln is said to have racked up somewhere around 300 victories. Seriously, just let that sink in for a second. 300 wins in one of the toughest, roughest sports of the time. That is an absolutely insane record.
And you want to know what's even more mind-blowing? Out of all those hundreds of matches, there is only one. Just one single known defeat. I mean, come on. That's a level of dominance that's almost unheard of in any sport, ever.
But what's really telling is how he handled that one loss. It happened back in 1832 while he was serving in the Black Hawk War. And his reaction? Total class. He took the defeat with grace, shook his opponent's hand, a guy named Hank Thompson, and said he was the better man. It just goes to show his character was just as strong as he was.
So when you look at this timeline, it really puts his whole wrestling journey into perspective. I mean, from becoming a county champ in 1830 to his wrestling reputation being used as a plus in his Senate campaign in 1858, all the way to 1992, when the National Wrestling Hall of Fame officially recognized him. Yeah, his legacy as a wrestler is the real deal.
Okay, so all of this brings up a really fascinating question. Is there some kind of link between the skills you learn on a wrestling mat and the skills you need to, lead a country?
Well, it turns out Lincoln wasn't the only president who knew his way around a half Nelson.
Just look at this list. Lincoln is in some pretty incredible company here. George Washington, Andrew Jackson, Teddy Roosevelt, we're talking about some of the biggest names in American history. And they were all wrestlers. It really seems like there's a bit of a pattern, doesn't it?
And here is why this is so interesting. Wrestling isn't just about being strong. You have to have the mental toughness to outthink your opponent. You need the endurance to push through pain and exhaustion, and you need a relentless dedication to get better. Sound familiar? I mean, those are the exact same traits that make for a great leader, especially one facing incredible pressure.
So it kind of leaves us with this final thought to chew on. We know Lincoln's wrestling career made him a local hero and showed everyone what kind of man he was. But when you see this pattern, all these wrestler presidents, it really makes you wonder, right? Maybe the very qualities that made Lincoln a champion wrestler, that discipline, that resilience, that strength under pressure, were the exact same qualities that helped him lead a nation through its greatest crisis. It's a question worth grappling with.